I never thought I would have to tell this story. At 83 years old, I still remember that day as if it were yesterday. The day God gave me the strength to take my children and escape. The wrinkles on my hands tell stories my mouth kept silent for decades. But now, I feel it is time to speak so that others won't suffer in silence as I did. First, I want to thank you for being here with me. And if this story has meaning for you, please support the channel, subscribe, and click the like button to show your support. Thank you so much. My name is Carmen Vidal. I was born in a small village near Seville in 1942, when Spain was still healing its wounds. My family was humble, but deeply devoted. My father worked the land from dawn, and my mother cared for us, her 5 children. We lived in a little 3-room house, with packed dirt floors and whitewashed walls. Sundays were special. We put on our best clothes, walked to the village's tiny church, and came back feeling closer to heaven. We were poor in possessions but rich in faith. My father always said, in this house, God comes first, everything else follows. Every night, by the light of an oil lamp, he would read a passage from the Bible, a treasure he had inherited from his own father. My mother taught us to pray before every meal, even when that meal was just bread with oil. My siblings and I learned hymns before we ever heard popular songs. I grew up believing a Christian home was the greatest gift God could give. When I turned 18, my father arranged a special trip. Our small congregation was going to a large church gathering in Madrid. It was 1960, and for me who had barely left the village, it felt like an extraordinary adventure. I spent weeks sewing a new collar onto my only good dress. Carmen, my mother told me while carefully combing my hair that morning, behaved like a young lady. There will be many young servants of God looking for a wife. I blushed, but in my heart, I held that same hope. I'll never forget that journey. 30 brothers and sisters packed into a rickety bus, singing hymns the entire way. We arrived in Madrid with sore bones but lifted spirits. The conference was held in a large rented hall, decorated with paper flowers and posters with Bible verses. I had never seen so many believers gathered in one place from different regions, speaking with different accents, yet sharing the same faith. I felt small and yet part of something immense. That's where I met him. Raphael stood beside the pastor leading the choir, his Bible under his arm and a smile that lit up the entire room. He wasn't particularly handsome, but he had a presence tall for the time, with broad shoulders and carefully combed black hair. His voice, when he led the singing, rang with an authority that made us feel closer to God. My cousin Pilar whispered in my ear, "He's the son of the Mendoza pastors. They say he studied in France and has a special calling." That afternoon, during the snack after the service, Raphael approached our table. My heart skipped a beat when he stopped in front of me. "Do you like to sing?" he asked me directly. His gaze was intense, as if he could see something in me I didn't yet know was there. When I nodded shyly, he invited me to join the choir for the closing service. My friends looked at me with amazement and a little envy. The son of the respected Mendoza pastors had noticed the girl from the little village near Seville. On Sunday, while we were singing Great is Thy Faithfulness, I felt that every word took on a new meaning. Raphael led with passion, his hands keeping the rhythm, his bright eyes scanning the choir until they landed on me. It was as if God himself were weaving our destinies together, as if every note were an invisible thread pulling us closer. After the service, he asked for my address. "I'd like to write to you, Carmen," he said with a seriousness that made me tremble. I believe God has a purpose for us. The following weeks moved to the rhythm of his letters. Back then, there were no telephones in every house, nor those gadgets my grandchildren can't let go of now. Correspondence was slow, but each envelope with his neat handwriting was a treasure I kept under my pillow. "My dear Carmen," he would write on cream-colored paper. "Every day I pray to discern God's will for us, and each day his answer becomes clearer." He told me about his theological studies, the churches he visited, his longing to serve in places of need. I replied with stories from my simple life, feeling I had little to offer except my heart. 6 months after we met, Raphael arrived in our village unannounced. He came in a borrowed car, wearing a spotless suit and holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. My father received him with some suspicion, but that evening, as we ate my mother's special stew, Raphael spoke of his intentions. He had been invited to pastor a small congregation in Valencia, a church in need of renewal. We won't have luxuries, he admitted, looking my father straight in the eyes, but we'll serve God together, and you will never lack what you need. My heart raced as I realized he was asking for my hand. My father questioned him at length about his plans, his family, his doctrine. Finally, with a deep voice, he said, "If Carmen agrees, you have our blessing." We were married in the spring of 1961, in our village's small church. My sisters and friends decorated the chapel with wildflowers. My dress was sewn by my mother, Aunt Dolores, and me, using fabric we bought in installments at the local haberdashery. Raphael had invited several pastor friends, who came from Madrid and other provinces. "A virtuous woman, who can find her worth is far above rubies," quoted my father-in-law during the ceremony. I trembled with emotion under my veil, feeling that God had heard my teenage prayers. A life devoted to ministry alongside a man of God awaited me. How far I was from imagining that the altar where we exchanged vows would also be the place where my Calvary would begin. The first months in Valencia felt like living in a dream. We arrived at a modest but bright little house, with a small patio where I hung the laundry while listening to the birds. The congregation received us as if we had been sent from heaven. The women brought me freshly baked bread and advice on how to handle the region's hard water. The men helped Raphael paint the peeling walls of the temple. I felt part of a big family, just as I had dreamed during those months of courtship. Each morning, I woke up before Raphael to prepare his breakfast. I learned to make coffee just the way he liked it, strong, with a spoonful of sugar. I cleaned the house until it sparkled, sewed new curtains for the bare windows, visited elderly women in the church to read them the Bible. At night, when Raphael came home tired from visiting church members or studying for his sermons, I would massage his tense shoulders and listen to his plans for the church. "You are a gift from God," he'd say as he stroked my hair. "What we're building together is eternal." Sundays were especially sweet. I would put on my best dress and sit in the front row, proud to see my husband preach with such passion. The church members would invite us to lunch after the service, praising my potato tortillas and Raphael's biblical knowledge. "You are so blessed, Sister Carmen," the women would say. "Your husband is a true man of God." I would nod, genuinely feeling blessed, convinced that my marriage was proof of divine favor. I couldn't say exactly when things began to change. The shift was so gradual I hardly noticed it, like a cloud slowly darkening the sky until the storm is upon you before you even realize. Maybe it was the pressures of the ministry. The congregation was growing, which was a cause for joy but also for stress. More souls meant more responsibilities, more hospital visits, more counseling for struggling couples, more expectations from regional leaders who were now paying attention to our little church. Or perhaps it started when I became pregnant with our first child. Raphael was thrilled by the news, announcing it from the pulpit with tears in his eyes. "God is blessing our ministry with new life," he proclaimed as the congregation applauded. But in private, he began to worry about money. The modest salary the church could afford was barely enough for the two of us. "You'll have to tighten your belt," he warned one night. "No unnecessary expenses." I nodded, ready to make any sacrifice for our family, even when it meant stopping the small monthly money order I sent to my parents. The pregnancy was difficult. Nausea stayed with me beyond the first trimester, and the loneliness grew heavier. I missed my mother, my sisters. In my hometown, I had always been surrounded by family. Here, I had only Raphael, who was becoming increasingly absent. "Ministry doesn't stop just because you're pregnant," he would remind me whenever I asked for more of his time at home. "A good pastor's wife understands that the needs of the congregation come first." I swallowed my tears and nodded, remembering my mother-in-law's words at our wedding. The pastoral ministry demands sacrifices, especially from the wife. David was born in our home, as was still common for many women in Spain at the time. The neighborhood midwife, Dona Remedios, came when the contractions began. Raphael stayed in the living room, as men did in those days, while I endured 18 hours of pain with only that seasoned woman's experience and her prayers to help me. When I finally heard my baby's cry, I was overwhelmed with joy. "It's a strong boy," Dona Remedios announced, bringing the baby for Raphael to see. My husband came in briefly, kissed my sweaty forehead, looked proudly at his son, and then left to tend to a dying brother who had sent for him. The first weeks with David were exhausting but filled with a love I had never known. his tiny body against my chest as I nursed him, the scent of milk and soap, his little fingers wrapped around mine. Every moment felt like a miracle. Raphael seemed delighted with his son, presenting him at church, carrying the only photograph we could afford in his wallet to show everyone he visited. But at home, David's nighttime cries deeply irritated him. "Can't you make him stop?" he would complain. "I need to sleep to serve the Lord tomorrow." It was around the 3rd month after the birth when I noticed the first truly alarming changes. Raphael started coming home late, long after church meetings had ended. His breath carried a smell I didn't recognize at first, but soon identified as cognac or anise. One night, mustering my courage, I asked him where he had been. His response was a look I had never seen in his eyes before, cold and threatening, like a winter sky. "Are you questioning me? Me, who works day and night for this family? Is this how you honor your husband?" I was speechless, feeling as if I had been slapped, though he hadn't raised a hand. That night, while he snored deeply, I knelt beside David's crib and prayed fervently, "Lord, help me be a better wife. Show me what I'm doing wrong. Give me wisdom to support Raphael in his ministry." It didn't occur to me then that perhaps I wasn't the one who needed to change. I had been raised to believe that the success of a marriage depended mainly on the wife, on her submission and her ability to create a peaceful home. One Sunday, while cleaning Raphael's study in search of a Bible he had misplaced, I found several empty bottles hidden behind his theology books. I stared at them for a long time, unsure what to do. Alcohol wasn't explicitly forbidden in our denomination, but moderation was expected, especially from pastors. Should I mention it, remain silent, speak to a church leader? I finally decided to pray for him and be more understanding of the pressures he faced. "The Lord heals and restores," I told myself. "This will pass." I became pregnant with Marcos when David was just over a year old. Physically, this second pregnancy was easier, but emotionally, it was harder. Raphael spent less and less time at home, and when he was, his moods were unpredictable. Sometimes he would hold me tenderly, whispering future plans and apologizing for his absence. Other times, the smallest inconvenience, a meal not hot enough, a missing sock, would trigger a storm of reproaches. I learned to read his moods like one reads the weather, adapting myself to minimize the tempests. Marcus's dedication at church was a beautiful event. Raphael held our second son high, like Simeon with baby Jesus, as he proclaimed God's blessings over our family. "The Lord has given us these children to raise warriors for his kingdom," he declared with fervor, "a strong family for a strong ministry." The congregation applauded, moved by the scene and his words. I smiled, holding David's hand, presenting the image of the perfect pastoral family, while inside me grew an emptiness that not even the joy of a new baby could fill. But at home, reality was different. Marcus's nightly cries, combined with David's constant crawling and mischief, raised the tension to unbearable levels. Bills piled up: diapers, milk, medicine, while Raphael's modest pastor's salary barely covered the basics. One night, I found Raphael in the small storage room, drinking straight from a bottle. When he saw me, he tried to hide it, but it was too late. "Raphael," I said gently, "maybe we should talk to brother. He struggled with similar issues, he might understand." I couldn't finish the sentence. The slap came so suddenly, I didn't even have time to protect myself. I hit the wall, more shocked than hurt at first, as Raphael loomed over me. "You think I can't control this?" he shouted. "Who do you think you are, to judge me? The pastor has a right to rest." As I covered my face, bracing for another blow, I heard him murmur verses about a wife's submission, twisting God's words to justify the unjustifiable. Wives should submit to their husbands in everything. That night, lying on the far edge of our bed, my cheek throbbing and my soul even more wounded, something inside me died. The illusion that we were building a ministry for God together, that we were a team, united by a divine purpose, dissolved like mist under the sun. And yet, the next morning, Raphael acted as if nothing had happened. He kissed me before leaving, patted the children's heads, and walked out whistling a hymn. That's when I learned another lesson. Violence would always be followed by an artificial normalcy that left no room to speak of what had happened. In the years that followed, I learned to live in two completely separate worlds. At church, we were the exemplary pastoral family. Raphael preached passionately about the love of Christ, the importance of forgiveness, the sanctity of marriage. I led the women's group, taught Sunday school, organized baskets for the needy. I smiled and sang, my hair carefully styled to hide the strands he pulled out during our last argument, my modest clothing covering the bruises, my makeup concealing the sleepless nights. At home, I developed a keen sensitivity for signs, the way Raphael closed the door when he came home louder when he'd been drinking, the tone he used when calling me low and sharp when he was about to explode, the tense silences before the storm. I learned to hide a few coins in the curtain lining, just in case we needed to run. I kept a small first aid kit under the floorboards of the closet. In moments alone, I imagined where I'd go, what I'd do if the unthinkable ever happened. And still, each night, I prayed, Lord, heal him. Restore our marriage. Give me strength to be the wife he needs. David, our eldest, was the first to show clear signs that he sensed what was happening. At 4, he would jump at loud noises. At 5, he started wetting the bed again, long after he'd stopped using diapers. At 6, he began stepping between his father and me when arguments escalated. Daddy, look at my drawing, he'd say, tugging Raphael's sleeve when he saw his face darken with rage. Daddy, can you help me with the homework Miss Mercedes gave us? My heart shattered, watching my little boy become a protector, taking on a role that never should have been his. Marcos, on the other hand, became extremely quiet. While other children his age were starting to talk, he remained silent, watching with his large dark eyes. Don Justo, the neighborhood doctor who cared for nearly every family, grew concerned during a visit for a cold. The little one doesn't talk yet. Are there a lot of arguments at home? He asked gently, with the tact earned from years of trust. I shook my head, afraid that any truth might make things worse. He's just developing at his own pace, I replied, repeating the lines Raphael had told me to say. The doctor looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to see beyond my words, but finally nodded and put away his stethoscope. Visits to my family became increasingly rare. Raphael always found excuses: too much work at the church. The children might get sick on the trip. The car borrowed from a brother wasn't available. Besides, he would add in a warning tone, your sister is a bad influence. She's separated, isn't she? Do you want our children growing up thinking that's acceptable? My sister Carmen had separated from an unfaithful husband the previous year, causing a scandal in the town, and according to Raphael, this made her a threat to our marriage. And your parents, he continued, they don't respect my authority. Your mother is always sending packages, as if I can't provide for my family. Isolation became as much a part of my life as the pain I hid every Sunday. The friendships I had begun to form in Valencia were gradually cut off. That woman is worldly, Raphael would say about a kind neighbor who had invited me for coffee. That couple has problems, I don't want them influencing you, he'd say about a couple from church. Little by little, my world shrank to the four walls of our home, to the children, to the church where everyone only saw what Raphael wanted them to see, the model pastoral family. Sometimes, however, the cracks in the facade became visible. One afternoon, after the women's Bible study, Deaconess' wife lingered behind while the others packed up their Bibles and notebooks. She waited until we were alone to approach me. Sister Carmen, she whispered in a soft but firm voice, if you ever need to talk, my door is open. I saw in her dark, compassionate eyes that she knew something, perhaps because of the bruises on my arm that my sleeve had slipped to reveal unintentionally during the lesson, or perhaps from the way I flinched every time Raphael was mentioned. Everything is fine, I replied automatically, the words coming from my mouth like a recording. I'm just a little tired with the kids. You know how they are at this age. She nodded slowly, not quite believing me, but respecting my silence. She left a small card of Our Lady of Mount Carmel in my Bible. My address is written on the back, she said, without further explanation. I kept the card with a mix of gratitude and fear. Just having it made me feel as if I were betraying Raphael, but I didn't have the courage to throw it away. I hid it in the hem of a curtain, along with a few emergency pesetas, like a small beacon of hope. After 8 years of marriage, there was little left of the hopeful young woman I had once been. When I looked at myself in the small mirror above the sink, I barely recognized the woman staring back, skin and bones, dull hair, sunken and lifeless eyes. I had become a shadow, moving quietly through the house to avoid provoking Raphael's anger. anticipating his needs before he voiced them, molding myself to his shifting demands. My children also learned the art of silence, communicating with glances and gestures when their father was home, saving their laughter and play for the moments when we were alone. Life continued in this delicate balance of appearances and hidden realities, until one December we received a letter from my mother, more insistent than her usual monthly notes. She asked us to come spend Christmas in the village. "I haven't seen my grandchildren in almost 2 years," she wrote in trembling handwriting. "Your father is not well and constantly asks about you. Please, Carmen, come if you can." To my surprise, Raphael agreed after reading the letter. Perhaps he wanted to keep up appearances before my family. Perhaps he felt genuine remorse for having isolated us so much. Or perhaps, as I now suspect, he simply saw an opportunity to reinforce his image as the exemplary husband and father in front of my family. The trip to Seville was strangely tense and yet full of hope. The children, now 7 and 5, were excited to get to know their grandparents better, whom they barely remembered. I had a knot in my stomach, fearing that my mother, with her sharp intuition, would see beyond the carefully constructed facade we had put up. Raphael was unusually kind and attentive, loading the luggage onto the bus, buying churros for the children during stops, reminding me to take my motion sickness pills, like he used to during the early days of our marriage. My parents' house welcomed us with the familiar aroma of slow-cooked stews and cinnamon, with the nativity scene set up in the corner of the living room, and a small pile of gifts wrapped in hand-painted newspaper. My father, indeed thinner and more hunched than I remembered, embraced Raphael like the son he never had, while my mother poured her attention over the children. For the first few days, I allowed myself to let my guard down a little, recovering a piece of the Carmen I had been before, becoming Pastor Man's wife, was in the kitchen, while we were preparing the cod for Christmas Eve dinner, that my mother finally said what she had surely been thinking since our arrival. "Your skin and bones, my daughter," she remarked while efficiently chopping garlic. She looked me straight in the eyes, something few people did with me anymore. "And your eyes, they've lost their light. What's going on? Carmen, are you ill?" The concern in her voice nearly broke me. For a moment, all the words I had held in 4 years rose to my throat, threatening to spill like a river after the thaw. I wanted to tell my mother everything. The words were there, on the tip of my tongue. But then my mother-in-law walked into the kitchen, her ever-serious face framed by the black scarf she had worn since her husband's death. Though she lived in Madrid, her presence in our marriage was constant through her weekly letters, always defending her son. "Ministry is demanding," she commented, looking at me with that mix of reproach and pity I knew so well. "My Raphael carries a heavy burden. He needs a strong wife by his side, not someone who complains about trifles." That night, while everyone slept, I knelt beside the bed in the small room I shared with my children and begged, "Lord, if this is my path, give me strength to go on. But if there is another way, show it to me, because I am dying inside." The words of Psalm 88 echoed in my mind, "You have taken from me my closest friends and have made me repulsive to them. I am confined and cannot escape." Never before had I felt the psalmist's pain so deeply, his sense of abandonment, his desperate search for a divine answer that never seemed to come. We returned to Valencia after Epiphany. Raphael had been unusually kind throughout the entire visit, gifting my parents a new radio and playing with the children. But the moment we closed the door of our home, the mask fell. "Your mother has been putting ideas in your head," he accused me as he unpacked the suitcase. "I saw the way she looked at you, how she tried to pull you aside in the kitchen." His tone was controlled, almost reasonable, which made it more terrifying than his shouting. "There will be no more visits to your family. It's clear they are a bad influence on you and the children." The following months were a succession of gray days, where routine blended with fear. Raphael alternated between periods of violence and promises of change that never came to pass. "I'm sorry, Carmencita," he would say with tears that seemed sincere. "It's the stress of the ministry, the problems with the deacon board, the pressure of building the new temple. If you had more faith, you'd understand this is just a trial. God is refining us." And I wanted to believe him for the children, for the vows I had made before God, out of fear of what my life would be outside that marriage. Who would want a 30-year-old woman with 2 children? How would we survive without our own resources? What would people at church say? My mother's letters, increasingly frequent and filled with concern, began to disappear. One day, while rummaging through the trash looking for a drawing David had made one Raphael had thrown away, calling it a waste of time, I found fragments of an envelope in my mother's handwriting. That's when I understood Raphael was intercepting my mail, deciding what I could and couldn't read. That small control, that invasion of the little privacy I had left, hurt more than many of his blows. That night, while making dinner, the spoon trembled in my right hand for several minutes, as if my body were expressing the rage my mind didn't allow itself to feel. The breaking point came on a particularly hot July night. The heat made the tiny apartment feel even more claustrophobic. With the windows shut so the neighbors wouldn't hear the arguments, Raphael had been drinking since early in the day, upset over problems at church. Attendance had dropped, offerings weren't enough to cover expenses, and 2 families had left the congregation to join another church in the neighboring district. The children were already in bed when he started accusing me of conspiring against him with the deacons. "I saw you talking to S-wife after the service," he shouted, shaking me by the shoulders. "What did you tell her about me? Are you trying to destroy my ministry?" I tried to calm him, assuring him we were only talking about Sunday school, about the next lesson for the kids, but his fury kept rising like a pressure cooker without a release valve. When he grabbed me by the neck and pushed me against the kitchen wall, I saw stars and felt the air cut off from my lungs. In those seconds of suffocation, I thought I was going to die. That night, that my children would find my cold body in the morning, that no one would believe the respected Pastor Mendoza could commit such an act. A strange calm washed over me. "Lord, receive my soul," I prayed silently, almost resigned. What I didn't expect was to hear David's voice, my 10-year-old son, shouting from the doorway, "Leave Mom alone." I hadn't heard him get up, but there he was, in his pajamas, his small fists clenched and a grown man's determination on his young face. What followed now feels like a nightmare in slow motion. My son throwing himself at his father, hitting his legs with all the strength a child of his age could muster. Raphael releasing my neck, shocked by the unexpected attack. Me, coughing and gasping for air, watching as my husband turned to our son with an expression that froze my blood. It wasn't Raphael looking at his firstborn, it was a stranger, a predator evaluating his prey. In that moment, something inside me awoke. An instinct older and more powerful than fear, deeper than the teachings of submission and sacrifice. The instinct of a mother protecting her young. I stepped between Raphael and David with a speed I didn't know I possessed. "If you touch him," I said, with a voice that came from some unknown place within me, "I swear to God the entire congregation will know who their pastor really is." My words, more than my physical presence, seemed to stop him. He saw something in my eyes, something he may have never noticed before. There was no fear there anymore, only a fierce, unshakable determination. He stepped back, confused by this sudden shift in the balance of power that had defined our relationship for so long. That night, while Raphael slept off his drunkenness on the couch, I made the decision that would change our lives. It wasn't easy. The weight of my religious upbringing, the marital vows I had made before God and men, the fear of the unknown, the fear of social condemnation, all of it battled against the growing certainty that we could not go on like this. I held David close, who had finally drifted into a restless sleep beside his brother, and I whispered, "Thank you, my brave one. Mama is going to fix this." As I watched him sleep, different verses came to mind than the ones Raphael used to quote. "Let the little children come to me, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." How could my children come to know a God of love while living in constant terror? What was I teaching them by allowing the abuse to continue? The days that followed, I planned our escape with the stealth of someone plotting a prison break. I gathered our important documents, the children's birth certificates, my marriage certificate, my medical service card. Each day, I hid a few essential clothes in a bag I kept in the storage room, under boxes of old newspapers. I counted and recounted the few pesetas I had managed to hide away over the years, calculating whether they would be enough for bus tickets and a few days of survival. And in my bravest act, I wrote a letter to my Uncle Manuel, my father's brother, who lived in Barcelona and had always been the most independent and liberal of the family. In that letter, I poured out everything I had kept inside for years, the abuse, the humiliation, the terror we lived in. I know asking this is a lot, I wrote with a trembling hand, but we need a temporary refuge until I can find work and a place of our own. I promise we won't be a burden for long. I took it personally to the post office during a trip to the market, afraid that if I left it in the street mailbox, Raphael might intercept it, like he had done with my mother's letters. As the clerk stamped the envelope, I felt a mix of dread and hope. I had taken the first irreversible step toward freedom. My uncle's response arrived a week later, not by mail but through a phone call to the shared phone down the block. The neighbor from the third floor, an old woman who rarely left her house, shouted from her window, "Carmen, phone call for you at Don Emilio's store." Ran, my heart pounding, praying it wasn't an emergency with my parents. My uncle's voice, clear despite the distance and the bad connection, gave me my first true breath of hope in years. "You don't need to explain any further. EC, my home is your home for as long as you need it. I'll wait at the bus station every day, starting Monday at 6 in the evening. Come whenever you can." The following Monday, Raphael had an important meeting at the regional presbytery. He would leave early and wouldn't return until nightfall. It was my chance. That morning, while I prepared his breakfast like any other day, I felt a strange calm. I served his coffee just the way he liked it, ironed his shirt more carefully, and even placed fresh flowers on the table. If he noticed anything different about me, he didn't mention it. He left with a distracted kiss on my cheek and the promise to be home late. "Don't wait up," he said. "I'll probably have dinner with the brothers." He didn't know those would be the last words he ever said to me as his wife, living under his roof. As soon as the door closed, I sprang into action. I took out the bags I had hidden, added a few last-minute things, and dressed the children in their Sunday clothes. "We're going to visit one of your uncles," I explained while preparing some snacks for the trip. "We'll be staying with him for a while, in Barcelona." David, with the wisdom of a child who has seen too much, nodded without asking questions. Marcos, confused but obedient, followed me around the house asking, "And Daddy, is Daddy coming?" I left a short note on the table. "I can't go on like this. The children are with me. They're safe. Please don't try to find us." I didn't say where we were going, although I knew his first thought would be my family in Seville. The journey to Barcelona felt endless. 12 hours on a crowded bus, stopping in every town. The children restless and frightened, and I shifting between fierce determination and sheer panic at what I was doing. Every time the bus stopped, my heart froze, imagining Raphael chasing after us, suddenly appearing at the door to drag us back. I silently recited Psalms the entire way, clinging to promises of protection. "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear?" When we finally arrived at the Barcelona station, the sky was beginning to darken, and there, just as he had promised, was my Uncle Manuel, wearing his usual beret and a cigarette between his lips. The first few days in Barcelona felt like existing in a bubble, suspended between the past and a future I couldn't yet imagine. My uncle's apartment was small but warm, in a working-class neighborhood near the port. "It's not much," he apologized, "but there's room for the three of you in my son's room. He's doing his military service in Malaga." My Aunt Rosario, though she welcomed me with hugs and tears, couldn't entirely hide her concern about this sudden disruption to their routine. 3 more mouths to feed, 3 more bodies in an already cramped space. I tried to repay their generosity by helping in every way I could, cooking, cleaning, taking care of my younger cousins, always looking for ways to be helpful and less of a burden. One afternoon, while walking through the neighborhood, we passed by a small place with a modest sign, "Gracia y Paz Christian Community." Through the window, I saw a small group of people, mostly women, and a few elderly folks sitting in a circle. It didn't look like a traditional church, no elevated pulpit, no rows of pews facing forward. Something about that circular arrangement, where everyone seemed equal, drew me in. I didn't go in that day, or the next, but every Sunday I would pass by and glance inside with growing curiosity. Eventually, an older woman sweeping the doorway smiled at me. "Would you like to join us?" she asked kindly. "There aren't many of us, but we share what little or much we have: bread, stories, and hope." That small community gradually became our spiritual refuge. It wasn't a church like the ones I had known, and many considered it unorthodox, even suspicious. Traditional pastors from other congregations looked at it with distrust, sometimes labeling it as deviant. Leadership rotated among several members, including some women, something almost unheard of in Spain at that time. There were no long sermons, only conversations about biblical texts, where everyone could share their interpretation. We sang accompanied by an out-of-tune guitar, and shared a meal after the study. No one asked why I was alone with my children. No one suggested I should return to my husband for the sake of my soul. My professional path also began to evolve slowly. From cleaning at the boarding house, I moved on to work as an assistant at a small private school, thanks to the recommendation of a member of the Christian community who was a teacher there. Enrolling the children in school had been a real challenge, without paternal authorization. Public schools created endless obstacles. My Uncle Manuel had to rely on old contacts from his days as a union activist and present himself as the children's guardian. At the private school where I got the job, they were more understanding perhaps, because they needed staff, and I accepted a lower annual salary. It wasn't a teaching position, but something more modest. I helped with the younger children, prepared materials, and supervised recess. The children also blossomed in this new environment. David, who had been tense and watchful in Valencia, rediscovered the joy of playing and learning. His teachers noticed his intelligence and sensitivity. "He's got the makings of a teacher," they told me during school meetings, and I smiled, remembering my own youthful dreams. Marcos, on the other hand, gradually overcame his mutism. One day, during dinner, he suddenly began telling an elaborate story about a dragon he had seen in the park. David and I looked at each other in astonishment. It was the longest speech we had ever heard from him. After that day, it was as if a dam had broken. He talked, sang, asked endless questions. The fear of legal retaliation from Rafael haunted me for a long time. At that time, Spanish laws overwhelmingly favored the husband. Legal custody of the children belonged to the father, and a woman who left the marital home could be declared in defiance and lose all her rights. Without the reform of the civil code that would come years later, my legal situation was extremely precarious. That's why I lived almost a year with temporary documents, afraid to use my social security card or any paperwork that might reveal our whereabouts. A lawyer who attended the Christian community told me in confidence that Rafael had every legal right to claim the children. "The law is on his side," he warned me. "Your only hope is that he doesn't want to face the public scandal a trial would bring." Over time, I decided to resume my studies. I attended night classes after work, while a neighbor watched the children. It was an exhausting period, working all day, studying at night, caring for the children, maintaining our small home. There were days when I barely had the strength to keep my eyes open while reviewing my notes. But every small achievement, every exam passed, every bit of knowledge acquired, was one step further from the fearful, dependent woman Rafael had shaped. I was reclaiming not just my professional training, but also my ability to think for myself, to have my own opinions, to imagine a future different from the one I had been taught was my only fate. Years went by. David graduated from high school with honors and earned a scholarship to study education. Marcos, though more introverted than his brother, developed a special talent for carpentry, learning the trade from Don, the husband of a woman in our Christian community. I was finally able to validate my teaching degree and secure a position at a public school when the educational reforms of the 70s created more opportunities. We were no longer the frightened fugitives who had arrived in Barcelona with 3 small suitcases. We had built a new life, modest but dignified, sustained by honest work and mutual affection. Rafael only reappeared in our lives once more, when David turned 18. I don't know how he found us after so long, perhaps a family member, perhaps a former member of the congregation who had moved to Barcelona. One Sunday, as we left our Christian community gathering, he was there, waiting across the street. He had aged. His once jet black hair now showed a receding hairline and abundant gray. But what struck me most was his gaze. It no longer held that intimidating intensity, but something closer to defeat. Instinctively, I placed myself between him and my children, but David, now as tall as his father, stepped forward. The encounter was brief and tense. Raphael spoke of repentance, of how God had transformed his life, of his desire to know his children. David listened in silence, with a maturity that surprised me. Finally, with a firm but respectful voice, he said, "Maybe someday, when I'm ready, we can talk. But today is not that day." Raphael nodded, as if he had expected that response. He turned his back and walked away. We never heard from him again. Years later, my sister wrote to tell me he had died of a heart attack. I prayed for his soul and felt a strange mix of peace and sorrow, the end of a chapter that had marked my life but no longer defined it. Today, at 83, sitting in this rocking chair overlooking the Mediterranean, I can look back with the clarity only time provides. I see young Carmen, so eager to please, so convinced that suffering was part of God's plan. I don't judge her. I understand she did the best she could with the tools she had at the time. I also see the 35-year-old woman who found the courage to flee, to choose life over the slow death her marriage had become. And I see, with satisfaction, the teacher, the mother, the grandmother I became in the years that followed. A life that could have drowned in fear blossomed in freedom. My children have given me 5 wonderful grandchildren, who are now adults, building their own paths. David became a university professor, dedicating his life to education, something that fills me with pride. Marcos opened his own carpentry workshop and is known in the neighborhood for his honesty and quality work. Both are respectful husbands and loving fathers, breaking the cycle of violence that could have scarred them forever. When I see them interact with their wives, treating them as equals, listening to their opinions, sharing important decisions, I feel that all the pain was worth it. Because they learned a different kind of masculinity than what they saw in their father, one rooted in respect and true love, not in control and fear. Faith remains at the center of my life, but it is a transformed faith purified by the fire of experience. I have learned to read the scriptures with my own eyes, to discern between interpretations that set people free and those that oppress. The God I know now is not the small, vengeful God that Raphael used to preach. He is the God who walks alongside the oppressed, who weeps with those who suffer, who offers not just comfort, but also justice. A God who loved me not in spite of my decision to flee, but precisely in that decision because I chose life over death. If there's one thing I would share with women facing situations similar to mine, it's this: God does not call you to die while alive just to make the appearance of a Christian marriage. He calls you to live in fullness, to seek the truth that sets you free, to be a witness of His love, not of your suffering. True Christianity does not demand that you sacrifice your dignity, your safety, or that of your children on the altar of social appearances or distorted interpretations of Scripture. To you, sister, who may be reading these words from your own hell disguised as Christian duty, I want to say this: God sees your tears. He sees the bruises you hide under long sleeves in the middle of summer. He sees how you protect your children from a harm they should never know so young. And God is not asking you to stay. He is not asking you to sacrifice your life or your children's lives for the sake of appearances. The same Jesus who taught us to forgive also confronted injustice and protected the vulnerable. I know the road is hard. I know the barriers feel impossible to overcome: financial dependence, fear of judgment, the guilt you've been taught, the loneliness, the legal uncertainty. I faced all of those obstacles in a Spain where a separated woman was almost treated like an outcast. But on the other side of that valley of shadows, a life awaits where you can breathe without fear, where your children can grow up knowing a God of love, not terror, where you'll discover you are stronger than you ever imagined. When the pain makes you want to die, but you hear God's whisper calling you to live, it's not rebellion to choose life. It is obedience to a higher, truer calling than the slow death of abuse. My story does not end in tragedy, it ends in hope. And yours doesn't have to end in tragedy either. Because the God who gave me the strength to take those 3 small suitcases and walk into the unknown will give you the strength too, when you are ready to take that step toward the freedom He always desired for His daughters. In my darkest moments, when suffering made death seem like the only escape, it was that call to life that saved me. Not an external call, not a voice from heaven, but that inner certainty that grows like a seed until you can't ignore it anymore. That voice that reminds you were created for freedom, not chains, for true love, not fear, for abundant life, not mere survival.
If you've followed Carmen's story thus far, we invite you to support our channel by clicking the like button. These stories of faith and overcoming reach more people thanks to your support. Subscribe now so you don't miss our upcoming testimonies. And if this story moved your heart, don't miss the next one that's showing up on your screen. Remember, when pain makes you want to die, God is always calling you to live. We'll see you in the next video.